Well, this is a very special episode of Cabernet and Pray. I was approached by a podcaster of another podcast called Rethinking Faith, who's very similar in the conversations that they have and in the guests that they have, and said, hey, would you ever be open to some type of podcast collaboration? And so I thought, I've not done it like that, but let's do it. And so we put our heads together and thought it would be fun to take some elements of my show, some elements of his show, put it together and create a special episode for you. And so that's what we did. I lovingly refer to it as podcast inception. It's like a podcast within a podcast. Josh is a guy that I immediately connected with, and we've been talking online, but we just hit it off. This is going to be the new record of the longest episode of Cabernet and Pray. So this is one, get yourself a nice glass, settle in, get ready to unpack some ideas. This was super fun to record, and I hope you get a ton out of it. I'm not going to introduce him because he introduces himself in the episode, but you are going to get a lot out of this. I'm so excited to bring you a very special edition of Cabernet and Pray. Enjoy.
I've never shared this with anybody publicly. There's so many things happening in this conversation right now. 1,000 years from now, people are going to be looking at this podcast saying, so this was the breakthrough.
If this was SportsCenter, that would be like such a hot take. Skip Bayless would have no idea. Stephen A. Smith would have no idea what to say if you drop that down. That is so good.
The joke I always say is like, how'd you learn so much? You got to drink a lot.
The power of food and beverage to lubricate an environment.
Resistance to change is hurting the church.
I'm not in the camp that God has a penis or a vagina or a body at all. I'm in the camp that God is a universal spirit.
This is the strangest podcast that I have been on. I don't even know what to do.
I'm kind of geeked up about this wine.
So this is my second glass, and it delivers a little more of a punch than I expected. So if I get a little loopy, it's your fault. You told me to drink on the show.
I will also say as a confession, I am a lightweight. So I've had like 3 sips of this wine and I'm already feeling it. So this is fun.
You've uncovered the mystery. You've exposed the formula.
You've just duct taped together a number of things that aren't normally hanging out together, and I'm here for it.
We're going to sit down at a table. We're going to have a glass of wine and some food, and we're going to talk about the beauty of Jesus.
Thank you for the hospitality that this particular podcast provides folks like myself, and I know others, to be curious around their faith practices.
I really appreciate this venue, what you're doing. It is fun, and yet you dig into the deep stuff.
I've heard about your podcast for a long time, and I love that you're a pastor and that you explore the world of faith through wine. That's very unique.
I will never forget the first time I bought a bottle of wine by myself, which was yesterday.
If you're familiar with drunk history, I thought it's like drunk theology. So I
got a little spicy there. It's the peach wine.
Apparently the wine is, here we are. Queer we are. Beer we are. No, it's wine, Jeremy.
By the way, drinking this Pinot Grigio at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is making me even more direct in my communication than I normally would be.
I know why you have your guests drink wine. It makes sense now. Yeah, I get it. A little bit of liquid courage to really unleash the beast.
I think you've got a good podcast. So throw in the wine bit in there. That's nice, doesn't it? Cabernet and Pray, yeah.
Well, hello, friends, and welcome to, I don't even know what this is. I think this is like podcast inception, when multiple podcasts come together. So my name is Jeremy Jernigan. I'm the host of Rebuilding Faith and Cabernet and Pray, and I'm joining Josh Patterson, who's got his own deal. Josh, what are you doing?
Yeah, so I run a podcast called Rethinking Faith, and I like your language there, podcast inception. We're kind of both on each other's shows at the same time.
I didn't know what, I was like trying to think of, what is this? What are we doing? That's what just, it felt right. Like it's a dream within a dream. You and me.
It fits. I like it. Yeah.
And what's awesome is I talked Josh into drinking wine with me today. So in honor of the Cabernet and Pray podcast that I do, we always have a glass of wine together. So Josh is a beer guy, but he is extending grace to us today. I'm going to introduce what I'm drinking. I've got a 2019. The brand is called Authentique. And this is a Murto Vineyard version of that. This is from Oregon. It's a Pinot Noir. And it's made by a guy named Nicholas Keeler. Nicholas has become a friend of mine over the last few years. And I recently just did a wine and whiskey trip where we had 9 of us and we spent a weekend in Oregon barrel tasting some whiskeys and then going to some wineries. We met up with Nicholas, and it was one of those, like, I thought it would be cool. You know, when we got there, he had agreed to do like 8 pours for us. A normal wine tasting trip, you're doing 4 to 5. And we ended up doing, I counted, 15 pours, which was slightly more than anticipated. And ironically, that ended up being the highlight of the trip for everybody. So everybody liked that. But this wine is a beautiful, the way I described Nicholas, he's like an artist with Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir is a signature grape in Oregon. It's my first love. And this one, so you get the traditional characteristics of Pinot Noir, like a cranberry, get some mushroom in there. But then this one, this is the way I'm going to describe it. It feels like a dark and rainy Oregon day, which some people hate. I love it. And literally, I'm in Arizona. I'm not getting lots of rainy days, but this wine is bringing me there. So this thing's deep. It's beautiful. I'm absolutely loving it. That's what's in my glass. Josh, what do you got today?
Yeah, so I'm not going to pretend to be a wine connoisseur. If we were doing beer, I could be more nerdy, but
you would smoke me on beer.
My favorite style of wine is Cab Sauv, and so when I was at the store, I decided to go with one with my name on it because, you know, I was even going to make a joke to you that, do you know that you have a wine named after you? But you were way ahead of me. Yeah, so I got, this is a 2022 Cab Sauv from Josh from their reserve line, and it's barrel aged, bourbon barrel aged specifically, I think for 2 months, if I remember reading correctly. And I love barrel aged wines, specifically in bourbon barrels. I think it just adds a nice depth and a little bit, you know, different character to the wine. So that's what I'm going with. But I had a question for you because I brought a regular wine glass with me from Bordy Vineyards, which Bordy is a fun winery here in Maryland. But also as a beer guy, I brought a beer glass that looks kind of like a wine glass from Full Tilt Brewing, which is my favorite brewer I ever worked at. Unfortunately, they no longer exist. Thank you, COVID. But I didn't know if this was breaking the rules. So I wanted to seek permission. Which one do you think I should go with?
That's a great question. And here's the fun fact. The biggest thing you look for in a wine glass, and people will get so nerdy about this, and you know, if you look online, you can find literally a wine glass for every specific grape that you want to, drink. So like if Cabernet Sauvignon, what's my wine glass? You will find a Cabernet Sauvignon wine glass. So if you want to buy a bunch of glassware, do that. That's awesome. If you don't, here's the rule of thumb. You want the bowl of it to be wider than it is at the top. That's at the end of the day, and both of your glasses accomplish that. And that's true with most glassware in general. Like you think a lot of the whiskey glasses, the most of them are designed where it's a wider bowl and then it gets more narrow at the top. And that's to allow you, when you have those aromas, to kind of capture them. So then when you smell it, you're getting all of that bouquet. So you're going to be awesome with either one of those glasses. So I would say rock it, man. Whatever one feels right.
All right, I'm going Full Tilt because I love this glass.
A whole stopper kit there. Look at you.
Oh yeah, my wife very much is the wine person, and so I'm borrowing some of her fancy things. Yeah, because I couldn't wait. I definitely cracked this last night with dinner.
Yeah, you did.
So had to make sure it was appropriate for the podcast. You know, I can't show up like a complete idiot. Only partial.
Cheers to you, my friend.
Likewise, cheers.
Now, have you had that one before? Oh, you had it last night, but is it a regular go-to for you?
No, I think this is my first time with this one in particular. I've had other Josh wines. Oddly enough, many people have gotten Josh wine as a gift and been like, dude, I bet you didn't know this. And so then I just get a bunch of them for free, which is really cool, you know.
I just need a famous Jeremy to create a vineyard then.
Yeah, that'd be sick. And I don't know if you've seen The Good Place, but if you named it Jeremy Bear Me, that would be a really cool wine.
I'm not aware of this.
Oh, man. The Good Place is a fantastic show. And the way they describe time is that it's not linear, but it's sort of a Jeremy Bear Me, which is they write Jeremy Bear Me in cursive, and that's how time functions.
What? How have I never heard this?
Yeah, do YouTube it when we're done.
You're like changing my life right now. This is going to be a thing.
Yeah, you are how time functions, so congratulations. It's the secret to the universe. If you ever
I
do
love
philosophy
it.
of time stuff, you're set up for success. So
Awesome. Well, what do you think about your wine?
oh, I love it. It's good. It definitely. I don't know if this is how I would talk about it with beer. It has some heat to it from the barrels. Like you can pick up some of the kind of burn from the bourbon. But overall, I mean, it's pretty smooth. I can't speak about wine in any intelligent way. Tastes like grapes, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's dry, which I prefer. I do know I prefer dry wine over sweet wine. But it's not like as dry as, I think like a Merlot would probably be a bit more dry, right?
Merlot's actually going to be a little bit more friendly on that scale.
Oh, really?
But it depends
Okay.
on the Cabernet. So Cabernets are kind of like the big boy with tannins is the thing that usually people are like, oh, that bite that you get, kind of dryness in your mouth. That's
Yeah.
from the tannins. Merlot's going to
Okay.
be more of a medium tannin, whereas Cabernet is like, again, depending on the Cabernet where it's from. But if that's like a California cab, they're usually pack a punch.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I wonder actually, because with beer, I prefer dry, bitter beers, like a solid West Coast. And so I wonder if part of my love for that is similar to why I might go for something like a Cab Sauv.
I totally think it is.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Sorry I can't be more intelligent
Oh,
with
man, that was great.
my wine language.
You dove into it. I love it. Well, what's so fun about this video is like we're kindred spirits. This is our first time meeting. We've interacted online before. We follow each other online, but this is the beauty of the web. Is it brings like minds together, and even some of our shows are named similar. We have similar journeys. I mean, literally, like there's so many parallels here. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about your show and what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So Rethinking Faith started this October will be 7 years. So I guess
Dude,
six
that's
and
a
a
long
half
time.
years. Yeah, it's been going for a while. It's been a lot of fun. It started out not being called Rethinking Faith. Originally, it was called Theology Doesn't Suck. And and it was an idea that me and a buddy of mine had at the time, who we had very different theological perspectives. I, at the time, was like a kind of somewhat edgy evangelical, and that I thought like women were cool and like maybe gay people too, because my brothers are gay. And then he was like a Westminster Confession or bust, hyper Calvinist, super reformed, like Tim Keller's not a real Presbyterian kind of guy. And so we tried to demonstrate that we could have conversations across, theological lines, and it worked until it didn't. He left because he was like, yeah, dude, I don't think I can talk to you if I'm going to become a pastor in my denomination, because like you're basically a heretic. So he left. I brought on a new co-host, my buddy Marty. He was the worship pastor at the first church that I was ever a pastor at. And we kind of bonded over negative church experience together. That place was not awesome, but we recorded 100-some episodes together, and it was a lot of fun. That's when the name change kind of happened to Rethinking Faith. Eventually, Marty got a job at the church that he currently works at. They were not super down with him doing the podcast as it, continued to grow and explore more questions that you shouldn't explore. Depending
This
on
is
who you
my
ask.
surprised face to that,
Yeah, right.
that part of the story.
Yeah. And then I brought on a buddy named Greg during a point in my life when, in my own kind of, spiritual journey, deconstruction journey, whatever you want to call it, Buddhism was really big for me, and I was very much into the mystics. Greg brought that aspect to the show. He was on for a while. He ended up leaving because of work stuff. And so ultimately I decided, like, I'm probably just a bad person to host a podcast with. It's clearly my fault. And so I've been going solo ever since. But yeah, Rethinking Faith, I love theology and philosophy. I fall broadly into the kind of process relational camp on days when I, am comfortable positing ontological truth claims of ultimacy, or to say it differently, on days when I still believe God's real. On days when I don't feel like that, radical theology is kind of my home. And yeah, so I love having big conversations with guests and explore faith and different ways people hold that. Yeah, so I guess it's kind of a bit about what I do. Yeah. Yeah, Rethinking Faith.
I like it.
Nerdy podcast.
I like it.
Yeah. But so tell me, since I guess you're also on my podcast right now, I would love for you to tell my listeners about what kind of stuff you do as well.
All right.
Yeah.
So I have 2 podcasts, and the way I would describe it is I started with one called Cabernet and Pray, which was kind of an outpouring of my ministry journey, where I would, I was a lead pastor in Oregon for 3 years, and I would meet with people, and then we'd go to, the wineries, like on a Saturday. My wife and I would take a couple out, and we would get in the best conversations, over a wine tasting. And then I would see them at church the next day, and they'd be like totally different, and it was prim and proper. And I'm like, what happened? And I liked the way you were yesterday. That conversation was more fun. And so after I left the ministry officially, I was like, I really love having, similar to you, I love having theological conversations, but I want them to be real and authentic and not stuffy. And so I thought, how fun would it be if I got people to drink wine with me while we talked about God, And so a lot of times it's people who they drink wine like privately, but they don't talk about it, as you mentioned, because certain circles, you got to be hush hush. So a lot of the guests, this is like their first time I'm outing them as alcohol drinkers, so they're having a glass with me, and they're these professors and academics and like authors of incredible stuff. And then you're watching them get a little buzz and lighten up on the episode. And it's so fun and it's so good. And I'm not a lightweight, so I drink regularly, but I'm always amazed how quickly someone can start to feel it, with one glass. And we often get to see that on those episodes. So I would kind of put that into like the deconstructing camp. A lot of those conversations are rethinking some things that you grew up with, you were told it had to be this way, and we kind of unpack, hey, maybe there's another way to think about it, and really going at it that way. And then I had a friend of mine challenge me a little bit ago, and he said, hey, you're doing a great job for people in the deconstructing community. He's like, what are you offering people as they reconstruct something better? And it was such a good question. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. Like, that's really hard to offer, like, I'm not a church. Not trying to be a church. So then I started like putting more time and more thought into that. And then that led ultimately to a second podcast that I do. This one's weekly. So the first one's every 2 weeks. This one is weekly, called Rebuilding Faith. A little different than yours, where I cap it at 10 minutes an episode. So they never go longer than 10 minutes. And I teach through the Bible. So I'm literally going through the Gospel of John, 10 minutes or less every single weekend, and trying to literally offer people, like, if you grew up going to church and Sundays feel weird because you have that, but you don't want to go to a church now, or you can't for whatever reason, but you still are feeling like I would like to study the Bible, I would like to grow in my faith, I offer something. So it posts on Sunday mornings and becomes this thing where then people can gather around, and it's designed to have conversations. So rather than listening to a preacher for 50 minutes, you only watch a 10-minute video or listen to it, and then there's questions that I create with it as well. And so that's been really cool. And I'm trying to figure out ways to offer both the deconstructing and the reconstructing piece holistically together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sweet. Absolutely. I think that's really cool, because I like your friend and how they kind of challenged you on that, because I think it's needed, right? There's a time and place for the kind of deconstructive stuff, and the way of how, we're using that word in pop culture today. But also, yeah, like you said, people, it's good to throw rocks for a while or ask questions, but then, like, what do we do next? And so the question for me in that vein, that's, I kind of try to operate Rethinking Faith out of, comes from Richard Rohr, where he says the best the best critique of the bad is practice of the better. And so, like, there's definitely, deconstructive themes currently in Rethinking Faith. If you go back, maybe 3-4 years, it's much more prevalent. But now it's kind of, I try to do the practice of the better and just have cool conversations and, see what happens. But yeah, I think that's sweet. I like the kind of the holistic 1-2 punch that you got going on.
I'm trying, man. I'm trying to, for a long time, I thought I would retire as a lead pastor, and, I was 2 decades in the church world, and like my life made sense. Like, this is what I'm going to do, and I'll retire doing this. And then when I walked away from it, it was like, I don't know who I am anymore. How do I offer something helpful when all of my training is in this thing that I don't really want to do anymore? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I think so. I was in vocational ministry for only 6 years. And in those 6 years, I was between 3 different churches. The first one I was a teaching pastor at, and that church, like I said, was not great. To be quick, I experienced verbal, spiritual, emotional, and borderline physical abuse while working there. I was there for 8 months, and it was 8 months too long.
Yeah.
So I pieced out of that place pretty quickly, picked up a gig as a youth pastor, or they call it youth director, because I wasn't ordained in the Methodist church, at a Methodist congregation, which was fine. The church wasn't great. There was a lot of like unhealthy staff things that happened, but overall it was a much more positive experience in the first place. And then the third church, we left Florida, I came back to Maryland, where we're from, and I have nothing bad to say about Seneca Creek. I'll actually name them. They were wonderful. Pastor Mark and Pastor Jeanette were very helpful to me. They provided a lot of healing that I needed, but I was kind of like super duper damaged goods when I started working there. And so basically through the help of actually Pastor Jeanette and then also a spiritual director, I decided like, okay, it's not healthy for me to any longer be a pastor, and also not just for myself, but also for those who I'm serving. I didn't want to, my kind of faith crisis that I was having, I didn't want to unnecessarily like dump that on people. That's not my job as a pastor. So, but yeah, and then after that, I was like, I don't know, what do I do? That, I had conflated my identity with my vocation at the time. So it's like, Josh is pastor. I don't know how I exist outside of that. So I don't know. I became a bartender and then started making beer.
I love it, dude.
But I continued with the theology and philosophy and podcasting. So that was my, I guess, connection that I maintained.
I don't know if you know a guy named Jordan Hughes in Oregon. He was a youth pastor for many years, and then he left that to go be a bartender, and he like has blown up. I had him on an episode. He's blown up on social media, and now he like literally teaches bartenders how to capture that stuff on video for social media. And I mean, incredible stuff. And you ask him like, oh, what did you do before this? Like, I was a youth pastor. I mean, it's just like, there's a handful of us that have a less than standard trajectory, I guess.
Yeah. It's funny because I think I was actually genuinely surprised how much of an overlap there was from like skill set for pastoring people and bartending. Specifically in the, in the realm of like interpersonal communication kind of stuff. People come and sit down at a bar and they pour out their life to you. Like, I had conversations with people that were like so personal after knowing them for, 30 minutes because I poured them a beer, than I did with people who I'd been, working in a church with for like 2-3 years. And I was like, what? This is a weird thing. Like people just sit down and are like, here's everything bad I've ever done and why I'm a giant piece of shit. And help me. And be like, oh, this is interesting.
Yeah.
This is I don't know, interesting overlap, I guess.
And here we are.
Yeah, and here we are podcasting.
Just a couple dudes talking about God on a podcast.
Yeah, classic. That seems to check out, right? The trajectory is there. There's a pipeline, I think.
So to all the listeners or viewers of this, if you are currently in ministry and seeking another profession, there are options for you. So
yeah, there are. now you know. Yeah,
I love
it. Worth having a go at. But
all right, you've got a segment we're gonna dive into. I'm stoked for this.
Yeah. So listeners of Rethinking Faith will know that we, every once in a while I put out this bit called 20-ish Qs, which I have to give a shout out. It was my buddy Trip Fuller. It was his idea initially, and people liked it, so I kept doing it. And it's basically invite someone on the show, and instead of, maybe going through a dense theology or philosophy book that they wrote, I prepared 20-ish questions that some are serious, some are silly, some are personal, and we just kind of go through them and see what happens. It's a lot of fun. People like the format. So I thought as a crossover, it might be fun if we try to do like a version of that where I have 10 questions for you and you could ask me 10 questions. We'll just kind of take turns and we'll see what happens.
I love it. Let's go.
All right. Do you want me to ask you one first?
I mean, sure. It's your segment. I want to honor it.
So let's see. I'll go with this one. So as you stated, you used to be kind of like a mega church pastor. So how has your view and understanding of church changed since you stopped doing that?
Ooh, just give me an easy one right off the gate, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, man. So the way I would describe it is like this. And some people will say of me, I just had this said to me this last week, that, oh, you're just bitter toward the church because you had a bad experience in it. And I think anyone who has had a bad experience in the church, probably many of you who are tuned into this right now, you probably have had that said to you as well. Like, you're just bitter and, you almost like you need to get over your own bitterness. I would not say I'm bitter. I would say I was hurt and I healed. And so the way I describe it, it's like a scar. You can poke on the scar. It still is there, but it doesn't bleed and it doesn't hurt anymore. But what it did allow me to do is see how the hot dog was made. And when I mean that, I mean, I was in a mega church in Arizona for 12 years. Then I went and led a mega church, multi-site. Both of these were multi-sites in Oregon and Washington for 3 years. I saw all the behind the scenes, like all the nitty gritty. And then when it went bad in Oregon, I watched how it went bad. I watched the power struggles, all those dynamics. And so I would say for me, it's given me an awareness of the totality of the American evangelical church model that most people only see like a little glimpse of. And I had a chance to really like get under the hood and see how all the engine runs. And there's a lot that is really concerning to me about the model itself. So not, this is not bitterness. It's not like I got hurt, so now I'm just pissed. But no, just like, hey, there's inherent things when you have a hierarchy of power and you add the faith dynamic to it. I think that gets really funky, really easy. And there's just a number of things like that. The cult of celebrity, that's a huge part of American evangelicalism, I think is a huge issue. So I would say leaving that has allowed me to kind of not only see it for myself, but then, and I don't know if this was similar for you, I changed my theology on a number of things after I was out of the church. And I always wondered why it was that. And I think the reason why is when you're pastoring a church, at least I felt as the lead pastor, I couldn't go too far beyond where my church was, like relationally. And I felt like it would be spiritual neglect to I believe things that none of my church does, so I felt like I had to we have to go together. Well, as soon as I don't have that, it's just God and I like, okay, God, what do I think makes the most sense? And all of a sudden, some of these like topics, I was like, oh, I for sure think that makes more sense than what I've been believing for a whole long, time. So that was like another shift. And so I feel like a tremendous freedom, but now what I'm trying to do is like dip my toe back into the church because I think it needs voices like ours and voices who are a little, to use Richard Rohr's phrase, from the edge of the inside, which I always love that image of, I'm not outside it, looking in, but I'm not in the center anymore. I'm on the edge of the inside. And that's how I think I've tried to now contribute something to the church moving forward.
Yeah, right on. I can relate with so much of that, especially as like the first church that I worked in, they kind of prided themselves on like, oh, we sell all these books and stuff that our pastor wrote about how to do this evangelical church thing and charge people astronomical amounts of money for said, books and programs. And kind of just seeing how this, like you said, the hot dog was made definitely was very off-putting to me. But at first it didn't cause any like theological questions. I was just like, oh, this way of doing church is dumb. I'm going to go try a different version of it, right? But then, of course, the theological challenges came anyway.
You couldn't outrun it.
I couldn't, no. I read too many books. It's my problem. It's my vice in life.
Yeah, the church is a difficult place. I was just having this conversation with a megachurch pastor last week. And he was asking me, hey, what do I think the future of the church is in the next 5 years? And I was saying, I think the church is going to have to make more space for people who can't wrap their head around certain things that you currently believe. And it's the point you just made about, if you read too many books and you know too many ideas, and then you hear the church say, everybody has to believe this view of this. And you're like, well, why? And what about the other views? And, and until I think more churches make space for people to go like, you don't have to leave if you want to deconstruct. Like you could deconstruct here. Like that would be a beautiful thing. Like, no, ask the questions here. Like we're going to make space for it here. I think that's awesome. Okay, let's get to my first question for you.
All right.
What is a book that has wrecked your theology in a good way?
Ooh, well, I have a cheeky answer to this question because it's kind of the first book that started to wreck my theology in a good way, and I don't think it was the intent of the author. So that book was Surprised by Hope by N.T. Wright, which is a book on eschatology and life after death. And it completely uprooted my understanding of like, oh, the whole point of Christianity is that when we die, our soul floats off into space to be in heaven forever. And like, that's the bit. And this, N.T. Wright challenges that completely. He's a New Testament scholar. So for him, it's not about us going to heaven, but rather heaven coming to earth, which he argues is how the Bible functions. And so that was a big deal to me. And then also that kind of opened up this question about like eternal conscious torment, hell stuff, because he's not a proponent of that, at least not in the book. He's like, that's just not what the text is doing. And so that kind of started a lot of my questioning when I was like, okay, so if I was wrong about this thing, then like what else is there out there? And then there's been, I can't tell you how many freaking books I've read since then. Too many. I just gifted like 150 books to a friend of mine for their wedding that my wife was like, you need to get some of these books out of here, dude. So like, hey, here you go, man. Enjoy.
I saw you just posted like your reading list for upcoming episodes. So that's how I always feel. People are like, I'm like, I really want to get to it. I'm backlogged. I gotta get some reading done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy. The pile is directly to my right, and it taunts me on a regular basis. But it's fun. It's cool. It keeps me engaged, and I don't know. I like hearing other people's ideas and having fun conversations about them. But yeah, Surprised by Hope. I know it's maybe not a sexy answer, but it's an honest one.
How many years ago was this?
Oh, geez. I read Surprised by Hope after graduating college. So this was probably 2012, 2013. And that perspective of like the whole point is, building the kingdom of God on earth that is in heaven, and that people can go around and create little pockets of heaven on earth. That was like my big thing that I always talked about with students, to the point where students made memes about it. Like there are memes of like, pockets of heaven and, silly stuff. These kids make fun of me, but it was deeply foundational. And I still find a lot of value in a lot of that, in that language and in those ideas, even if I might want to qualify things, a little bit differently than Wright does now. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. Right on. Well, here, since I gave you like somewhat of a hard one right off the bat, I actually want to ask you a question about how I bumped into you in the first place. So I think I saw you posted a video either with Tom Ord, who is a good friend of mine, or talking about Tom's work. And then I also discovered that you wrote an essay in a book that I also have an essay in on Tom's notion of omnipotence. And so I was wondering if you could just tell listeners about the chapter that you wrote in the omnipotence volume.
Good question.
Yeah.
I have to remember what I wrote.
I read it this morning, so I could remind you if you
did.
Need help.
Okay, good. You can check my work here. I think my title was something like "God isn't waiting for your cry for help" or something along those lines. And so Dr. Ord asked a handful of us to write, and you could they're like different options. You could take the idea, make it experiential, offer a rebuttal, all these different things. I was like, I want to make it experiential because that's where I love taking big, huge theology, and figuring out how to, like, the typical person can do something with that. So mine was figuring out how do these ideas affect prayer. And I was thinking about the way that we normally pray in all the circles I've ever been in. And I am a second generation preacher. I grew up in the church. So I've been in a lot of these circles in my years. It's always with this assumption that if we don't ask, God's not going to do it. So we have to ask for God to do these things. And as I was thinking about the omnipotence idea, I was thinking, he has this line where he talks about, a good God always is going to act, in the best interest of people. And so if we assume God is good, which I operate from that assumption, then we should assume God is always going to be good, which then makes some of our prayers a little weird because, and I use it like a parent. I've got 5 kids, and if one of my kids, if we took them to the beach and one of my kids starts swimming out and I'm realizing like, oh man, they're getting far out there. There's no part of me that's going to just sit idly and go, well, I hope they don't get in trouble. But if they do, they'll call out to me and then I'll know to interject. As a parent, that sounds like the weirdest thing ever. I would be proactively watching them engage, going, they might need my help. At no point would I say, hey, I'm not going to save them because they haven't asked me. Like that, like from a parent analogy, that just is a ludicrous idea. But I realized as I was thinking about, his writings and then prayer, I was like, that's how most people pray. It's like, unless we invite God to do this. And it's like, what kind of a God do we think like we're following? Like God won't intercede unless you ask God to do this. And so my chapter is all about what if we actually assumed that God is already doing what God could do for our benefit. Like God's already engaged. So then it's not, hey, God, I'm inviting you to come do something. It's us partnering with God. Us figuring out, God, what are you at work? And how could I further what you want to happen? How can I join you? How can I bring my free will and others' free will and, and really bring this together? And so that was the idea I had of like, hey, let's not like stand idly by and think like, well, if we didn't ask him, he's not gonna do anything. I just thought that's like such a monstrous view of a parent. And I couldn't reconcile that as a dad. And so why on earth am I projecting God is like that? And then I even say in the chapter, I think people will be like, well, yeah, of course this is true. Well, if you agree that's true, then stop praying the way we pray. You know what I mean? Like, I think people read it and they're like, well, of course. Like, it's, it's not controversial. Like, yeah, but it's like, but we don't pray like that. We still pray of like, God, please, would you do something for the good here? And it's like, what do you literally think God is doing and wants to do? Now, I do agree with Dr. Ord that, I think there are limits to what God can do. I don't view God in the traditional sense of omnipotence and all that. So that's probably way more than we have time for. But yeah, so that was kind of the essence of like taking that concept and applying it to prayer.
Yeah, sweet. I think that's great. That's an awesome way to apply it because I'm with you. I think that was always, even in my, like when I was still in church world, I was always uncomfortable when we would do prayers of like inviting God into something. Cause I was like, didn't you guys say that God was like everywhere or something like that? And so us like inviting God into something seems kind of counterintuitive. Like God was off, like, I don't know, in heaven, grilling up some steaks or something. And then he's like, oh, what's that? Oh, the church over there, they're inviting me. I guess I have to go. Like that seems silly to me. So yeah, but I'm with you. And my next question for you will be a follow-up to your chapter. But yeah, I'm with you on the rejecting omnipotence and all this kind of stuff. So
love it. All right, let's get into your chapter then. What did you write about?
Yeah, so I tried to bring radical theology and process theology together. So like for listeners who don't know, radical theology kind of comes out of the kind of like the whole death of God movement. So, the Holocaust happens. You have these Jewish theologians like, wait a minute, we're God's chosen people. Have you seen the Holocaust? WTF? Doesn't make sense. And you start people questioning the omni God, right? The God of all the omnis, the God of classical theism. You have people declare that God is dead. People like Paul Tillich, great German theologian, say amen, and try to do theology out of this space. And so it's an inherently, from a philosophical perspective, it's an inherently deconstructive mode of theology. Whereas process thinking, or which is a form of open relational theology, is constructive. And so oftentimes, they've been pitted against each other, but in reality, they have a lot of overlaps. And so what I try to do is bring in the work of a very prominent radical theologian, or he prefers to be called a philosopher, John Caputo. And I brought him into conversation with Ord's notion of omnipotence and called my chapter Omnipotence Perhaps, because that's a play on, Caputo. Caputo talks about God perhaps. He would say things like, God doesn't exist, but God is an insistence, an invocation, a provocation, a specter that kind of haunts, right? And we never know if God exists until after the fact, right? He calls it a theology of the event. So when we look back and we see a time when we loved our neighbor, we can say in that moment, we actualized the divine, right? God existed. So it's this God perhaps. And it's, to me, very similar to Tom's idea because, as you know, like the omnipotent God, the God of, whose power is love, is non-coercive, and like isn't going to just like take over us, make us do stuff to solve problems, but rather invites us to be co-creators, to use a word that you did, and, help God actualize God's will on earth as it is in heaven. And so you can see both of them require, by definition, humanly cooperation, creaturely cooperation, to actualize, for process thinkers, the will of the divine or God's initial aims, and for radical theologians to actualize the divine potentiality or something like that. So I try to bring those two together and see what happens. And so that's what I did. Much more theoretical, and a lot of people are like, why does that matter, Josh? The prayer bit was much better. But
yours sounds much smarter than mine.
Or I just read, again, 8 of Caputo's books and was like, I need to get this out of my brain.
That's happening when you're like, I can't stop this. I got to get it out. Well, sounds like you harnessed it well.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. It was hard. It was a challenge. It's weird doing, theologies where one believes in God and the other one doesn't, and say like, okay, how can these actually inform one another? But it's a fun thing. But it does, continue the process stuff. I was just curious for you, like, how did you come to find open and relational theology in the first place? And is like that kind of the camp that you would put yourself in today, so to speak?
So I grew up very traditionally evangelical. And again, I was a preacher's kid. I'm very, very well versed in that arena. And I remember going to college, and I went to a seminary for college, and started having questions that I didn't really love the answers I was getting, but I didn't know if there was something more. I just knew, like, I don't really love these answers. So I remember asking, like, a Bible professor, one of my favorite Bible professors, hey, I'm really struggling to reconcile like the God of the Old Testament with what I see in Jesus. And I just need something that's going to help me navigate that. Like, what would you recommend? And he literally like gave me a textbook. Like there's just a biblical summary textbook. And I'm like, this is not even helpful. It's like, no, I need someone to actually, so I kind of just began this journey of, after I graduated, and then I could read whatever I wanted to read because I wasn't taking classes anymore. So it's like, all right, I'm just keep reading. And I stumbled into a book. It was one of those, you've seen those 4 views books where they take a topic and they have, people on all ends of the spectrum. And it was Divine Foreknowledge, 4 views. And I've always loved the idea of, how does God know what God knows? And how much does God know about the future? How does God know the future? Like, just fascinating to me on a total nerdy level. So that's what this book is all about, divine foreknowledge. What does God know about the future? How does God know it? And there's 4 views in it. And there's this view written by Greg Boyd that was the open theist view. I had never heard of open theism in my life. I'm now in my mid-20s at this point. And it was like I met Jesus again. Like, I was so enamored with this view of like, this is incredible. And God is so real and so vibrant to me in this view. So then that launched me on this whole journey. I started like grabbing everything I could read from Greg. And then one weekend, I literally said to my wife, I'm like, I want to see what this theology looks like in a church. And so we ended up flying out to Woodland Hills in Minnesota one weekend. And I literally, I didn't know anybody. I just wanted to see what kind of a church does this theology produce. And we're walking around, we get into conversation. I end up meeting the teaching pastor there and just kind of bumped into him and explained, hey, we're, from Arizona. We're at this church, all this. And he's like, hey, would you want to meet Greg? I'm like, that would be incredible. Like, yeah, I'd want to meet Greg. So I go backstage, meet Greg, and we just like hit it off. And Greg does this whole thing, like little speech to me about how we need more people who understand this theology in the younger generation because guys like him are getting older. And I don't know, Josh, if this was the Spirit of God or what I had for breakfast, but I decided I'm just going to throw it out there. And I said to Greg Boyd, who was like this icon of theology to me, I said, well, Greg, if you ever want a young preacher who believes these ideas, I'll come preach for you for free. I don't know why I said that. I don't know where that came from. Just came out in this moment. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah, like maybe I'll take you up on that. He has no idea who I am. It was like some random dude just offers to preach for him. So I don't think anything of it. We go back home, whatever. Like a week or two later, I get an email from Greg. And it's basically like, holy hell, dude, you can preach is like the title. And he's like, hey, when I met you, I didn't know whether or not you could really preach, so I wasn't going to commit anything. He's like, but you can preach, and I'm ready to take you up on your offer. So Greg flew me out and then paid me nothing to go preach because I had offered that. And so I went and preached for him and just got sucked into the world of this theology is beautiful. That's like my first introduction to open theology. And then Greg started mentoring me after that. So then I would say, since then, so we're going on probably 15 plus years at this point, that he's just been my mentor. And so then he has introduced me to all of these people. So, Tom Ord and, Brian Zand and all sorts of people and all sorts of different things. So as we would work through theology, he'd be like, you got to go connect with this guy. And then that's how I got dialed in. So I definitely feel like I feel at home with a lot of open and relational theology. I also feel at home with Anabaptist theology. I feel at home in a number of different camps, these days. And so I find it helpful not to lead with that because the typical person I have found has no idea what you're talking about when you say these things. And then they kind of look at you like, oh, are you part of a cult? You're like, no, this is Christianity. You just don't know all these labels. So I don't usually lead with that, but those are the spaces where I most often feel at home, where it's like, oh, these are ideas I really resonate with. And so that was kind of my introduction to all of that.
Nice. Well, that's a sweet story, dude. Greg had played, a huge role for me in my own, experience. I read his book, Myth of a Christian Nation, in college, and then became like super annoying about it to all my friends, about like Christian nationalism and these kind of things. Yeah. And so Greg's awesome. I had the privilege of doing a few things with him as a part of this thing called Jesus Collective, which was super cool. Yeah, he's awesome. But when you said, the Anabaptist bit, I remember I was interviewing for a church when we were trying to move back from Florida to Maryland. And the pastor was interviewing me, and I mentioned that like I have an Anabaptist bend towards me. And this dude was like, what do you mean anti-Baptist? He was like, it's a non-denominational church, but like we're Baptists. And I was like,
why do you hate Baptists so much?
Anabaptist. And he had no idea what I was talking about. Yeah. And I was like, that's not going to be a good fit for me.
Yeah.
But he was like, anti-Baptist.
No, and I don't, if I say that, someone's like, inevitably, what the heck is that?
Right.
It's like, it's a term. All these are terms people don't know. And so the way I'll describe it is like, like the Amish and the Mennonites and, and they're like, yeah, I'm like, it's like that with all the weird cultural stuff. So like, just take the theology of what they believe without some of the cultural expressions of it. And so I'm actually having a conversation with a Mennonite church in Arizona right now. And we're talking about, different ways to partner and stuff. And so it's just funny. But again, people are like, Mennonite, like what, they say like really, Anabaptist is not something that the typical Christian understands. So you got to really soft sell that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I learned it from, so I went to Messiah College, now Messiah University in Pennsylvania, and they're not technically any one denomination, but they're very heavily connected to the Brethren in Christ. And so that's where I started to pick up a bunch of Anabaptist stuff. That's where I got connected to the Meeting House, which was, I think maybe the biggest kind of Anabaptish, as they would call themselves, expression at the time. And so I was very much a part of my story. And I still carry a lot of that with me, in my ethics and my disposition, especially with a lot of the kind of like nonviolence type stuff. But it's definitely a part of my story. But anti-Baptist is kind of funny to me.
Okay, let me connect my next question to that line.
All right.
Because when you have these ideas, what I have found as we're talking about, a lot of people don't understand them. And a lot of people think they understand these ideas, but they have radically different understandings of what some of these ideas mean. So I would thinking I'd love your answer to this. What's the biggest heresy that you've been accused of?
Oh, the biggest heresy I've been accused of. I've been accused of so many because they're probably accurate. I don't know. I mean, I think probably my conception of the divine is a big one for people. They get upset about because it is so radically different from classical theism. And if all you know is classical theism, then to hear something outside of that is like it's basically like you worship a different God. Like
Right.
That's a whole different religion. So that's a big one. I don't know. I mean, culturally, people get upset about, my support for like LGBTQ community, which I don't know. It's always so weird to me. Like I've told this before on the podcast, like I will have wild conversations with atheists and people of different faith backgrounds and all this kind of stuff. We'll question all of these things. And then what loses me followers is when we're like, and also gay people are cool. They're like, that's too far. It's like, what? That's where you draw the line.
I lost you there?
Yeah, right. Like, so that, I don't know. That's, in my mind, that's not a big thing, but, for people, I guess it is. Yeah, but so I think that I've been called an atheist a bunch, which is fine. Derrida had often said that, he could rightly pass for an atheist, and Caputo picked up that line and kind of ran with it. And if people want to call me an atheist, I'm fine with that, just because it's kind of like disruptive enough. And I think all theology should be atheistic, because there's gods we don't believe in, right? So all of us are an atheist to some extent. So that's fine.
Yeah, I like
call
that.
me an atheist.
There's
We
lots
can
of gods
flesh
I
out
don't
things.
believe in. Yeah, of course.
Right. Yeah. So
That's a good answer.
That's probably a big one is the God stuff. Yeah. Well, here, I'll ask you one that's kind of in line with that. What is the most difficult aspect of your faith that you had to rethink?
There's so many I've changed my view on, so I'm trying to pick one. I would say I'll have to piggyback on your last answer a little bit. When I came out as being affirming, it seems like that has been the biggest shift of all of my shifts. The only one there's two that I would put as like close runner-ups, and that would be when you openly challenge eternal conscious torment and posit the notion that Jesus might save everyone. That's a close second. And maybe also a close second, or maybe third, depending on who you're talking to, is if you challenge Trump and say, hey, maybe this is not the Christian Messiah that we all think, that this is. Those two are close seconds to the reaction. But I would say singly, like the single most, whoa, this one was massive, was when I said, hey, I was wrong about this. And I wrote a book in 2016 called Redeeming Pleasure, and I had a chapter in it about homosexuality. And in the chapter, it was almost like this prophetic notion. I even said, of any of the chapters in the book that I may look back on later and not agree with, I think this might be the chapter where here's my current argument, but I don't know if I will believe this into the future. And I don't agree with what I wrote in that anymore. But I literally said that in that chapter, which is, I always look back, like, I think I was like working it out, of like, hey, I think something's coming. But like I said, being a pastor in a church, that would have just, been a bombshell to the community that I was leading. And I don't think they were ready for that at all. As soon as I left that, it was like this no-brainer. And I'll tell you what was funny. You know, the moment I realized that I had changed my theology on this, I don't know if you've had one of these moments. I was sitting in a circle with 6 other evangelical pastors who I'm friends with. And we were having a great discussion about, you know, what can the church do for the LGBT community, and how, you know, and they were all pastors of churches. Like, how do you do this? And in that conversation, I realized I was arguing against every single one of them. And I didn't it was not like if you would have asked me that morning, hey, are you affirming? I would have been like, no, I'm not really there. But in the conversation, I'm realizing functionally, I'm adamantly disagreeing with all this. And again, it wasn't heated. It was just, I don't agree with that. And I don't, all this. And then I literally had this epiphany. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm affirming. Like, I guess I am. And, I don't agree with any of them on this. And that was the moment for me. But when I came out publicly saying that, I stopped getting invited to preach in a bunch of the places that I got invited to preach. I had people, like, at some of the churches where I would speak out, they would look up previous videos and stuff that I've done, and they would find that, and then they would bring that up to the elder. Like, I literally had this. I was speaking at a church. Someone found a video where I talked about Romans 1, and I unpacked why I don't think that verse is, that chapter is this slam against homosexuality. Someone found that video, took that to the elder board, and basically tried to get me uninvited from preaching. And I'd already gone out to the, it's like I was already at the church for the weekend. And so I ended up having to, like, alter some of the things I said in the message because they were just cautious. And you're absolutely right. That is the one issue that people just have no awareness of. And so I think when I said, hey, this is where I land on this, and now it's like I've already paid the price for it. So now I'm just being way more open with it. Like, yeah, this is where I'm at, and here's why. And so I just had a guy named Brandon Robertson on my podcast who wrote a book called Queer and Christian, which is phenomenal. And then that led to another guy emailing me to talk about his book about coming out of conversion therapy. And so it's just like, you realize, like, oh, this is a well of material the church needs to wrestle with. It's just sadly most of the church isn't. So that, I would say that one, rethinking that one has, like, been probably the biggest game changer.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big one. I had Brandon on recently as well. The episode's not out yet. It'll still be a couple weeks. But yeah, I really enjoyed Queer and Christian. And actually, I think I saw you, like, had a reel or posted a reel or two about it, which was sweet to see. But yeah, I remember even recently, so I went back to the church that I used to, the last church that I worked at, that I was a pastor at, which I always respected the head pastor there, Mark, for being willing to have difficult conversations, even to have positions that he didn't agree with represented. And so he agreed to have a conversation on, like, deconstruction with me, because I was telling him, I was like, dude, like, this is not only happening in your pews, but it's also happening on your staff. I guarantee it. So I went and we, like, did this cool, like, conversation, whatever, in the church for the sermon. And after the fact, I found out, I will not, out them in case someone listens to this, but a friend of mine that works at the church filled me in that a member of the tech crew quit because Mark let a homosexual speak from stage, and they were talking about me, and I'm not gay.
Wow.
And it was because I had my fingernails painted black, and that they made that assumption, which I guess is fair. Okay, whatever. My nails are painted currently, but, like, that really, it bothers people to the point where someone is willing to walk away from.
Okay, so why do you paint your nails?
I don't, so I've been doing it for, like, I don't know, about 2 years now. I remember kind of growing up, I don't know if you can see, I'm wearing an Emery shirt, which is
I'm a big fan.
Oh, sick. Okay. So emo music, that whole scene, always been my thing. I was the youth pastor that, black skinny jeans, black t-shirt, backwards hat, much like I present myself currently. So that's just my vibe. And I would always see, like, the bands would have, like, their nails painted or whatever. And I would be like, oh, are they gay? I'm like, no, it just looks cool. And so I was always too afraid to do it because of the association that people might assume something about me. And so I just remember actually being at Theology Beer Camp 2 years ago and having just a really profound experience Two of the people that were doing live music for the event that year were Derek Webb and Ivy King. Ivy King is a queer indie artist. She is amazing. And she has this song where she basically talks about how she grew up in the faith and all this kind of stuff, but she was never allowed to like do anything with it, right? Because she's gay. And I had this moment where I saw this queer artist performing on stage. Her song had a line in it that says, "That's atonement, bitch." And
that's a great line.
Right? And like my brother growing up, Jordan, I'm the oldest, he's the middle one. He was the one that always wanted to be a pastor. That was never my thing. I was the one that became a pastor. Jordan's gay and has been ostracized by the church completely. And so to see a queer artist on stage now, when I'm no longer a pastor and she is, and she's performing, I got very emotional. And for me, I was like, oh, that's atonement, bitch, in that moment, right? And then, so that coupled with Derek Webb performing, and he had his nails painted black, and I was like, you know what? Like, fuck what other people think. Like, if I want to do this, then I'm going to do it. And I came home and I was talking to my wife, and I was like, is it weird if I paint my nails sometimes? And she was like, I don't care. And so I just decided to do it. And I enjoy it. It's not always right now they're painted, but also it does, especially in today's climate, political climate, I'm more inclined to do it because I think it signals to people that you're a safe person and that they're going to be okay around you. And if some people want to, I've been called all sorts of names for it by various people. And if they want to do that, that's fine. Whatever, So yeah, that's a long answer to your question, but that's kind of the gist behind it. It looks cool and it signals to people that I'm safe.
I love that. That is super cool.
Yeah.
All right, let's see what question I'm going to go with next. If you could have drinks with any historical figure, who are you having drinks with, and what are you drinking?
Ooh, any historical figure.
I'm excited for your answer because you're a reader, so you could go lots of directions with this.
Yeah, I could. That's a really good one. I'm going to have to think about it. Any historical figure. My leanings are definitely going to be towards theology or philosophy for nerdy reasons, but also like there's some cool people that I really like that are outside of that world that are still alive today. Like there's a person who just made some major history that I would love to have a beer with, and that's Alexander Ovechkin, the captain of the Washington Capitals and now the all-time leading goal scorer in NHL history. And the dude likes beer. He's openly said on interviews after games when they ask him why he drinks beer that he likes the taste of beer. And I'm like, my kind of dude. So,
it's not more complicated than that.
Right. So that would be really cool. So I would enjoy that. But I don't know. I think and this is, basically just because of where I'm at in my mind space currently, I'd be really interested to talk to some of the kind of like death of God theologians and philosophers, over a beer or, wine, whiskey. I tend to stay away from hard alcohol because that's when my brain stops behaving properly. So probably beer, but I just have a lot of, questions I'd want to ask them, clarification on some things, like Jacques Derrida would be fun to talk to. Although I guess I'd have to learn French, which might be difficult, but I don't know.
You could have a translator.
Yeah. All right. Sick. Well then, yeah.
You just got to buy them drinks.
That's fair. All right. We'll go to a place where somewhere in Maryland where the breweries still know who I am because I used to brew in Maryland and they give me free beer and then he'll think I'm paying for him, but
nice.
I just tip the bartenders well. Yeah. So I don't know.
I like it.
I don't know, but I feel like both of those are lame answers, but that's what comes to mind, at least currently. But I'll flip it and I'll ask you a similar question that I like to ask on 20ish Qs, which is, so for you, it'll be about wine. You get to have wine with any member of church history specifically. All right, so you're hanging out the bar, the winery, get to have wine, have a conversation with this person, but you notice across the room or at the end of the bar there's another member of church history and they're just mean mugging you the whole time. And after you get to have your fun conversation with your buddy, you then get to go fight the other person who's been mean mugging you. Yeah. So you get a drink with a member of church history and then you get to fight one. And that fighting can be, metaphorical. So it can be a verbal altercation, or if you want to give up your Anabaptist ways.
You ask people?
Yeah. Oh yeah. People love it. Then you can fight them. And I've gotten all sorts of weird answers.
Wow. Okay. So I got to give you two people's names.
Yeah. You get a drink with one and then you can team up and fight this other member of church history. After you're filled with the Holy Spirit, if you know what I'm saying.
Oh yeah, I'd be filled with. Okay, so I'm having drinks with C.S. Lewis.
Oh, sweet. Okay.
Here's what I wish. So C.S. Lewis didn't get around to nonviolence. Like he didn't ever land there. And my working theory is it's because he lived, during the rise of Nazi Germany, and it would be really hard not to want to oppose that, right?
Yeah.
But my working theory is if you could get C.S. Lewis in a pub today, would he have a different take on it? I think he would, and maybe this is just my longing, but I think he's so logical, so rational. He's the first guy that I ever really read where I was like, wow, you're taking huge ideas and you're making them so simple. And that to me, like I said, I love that. I think Greg Boyd does that. I try to be that for people where it's like, I want to take really big ideas. And you even said, like, with your academic books that, you read, like taking these concepts that you either don't want to spend the time diving into, or in their current form, they don't make sense to you. And then almost being that bridge, that translator. I think C.S. Lewis was one of the best to do that. But there's a few things that I would love to see, like, hey, are you really landing here still? Or is this like you were a product of your times? So we would be talking about, he was a beer guy, so I don't know if I could get him to drink wine, but hopefully I could. So in this story, he's drinking wine with me. And we're going to talk about nonviolence, which is then going to be challenged because who's at the end of the bar is St. Augustine.
Oh, all right.
And I want to throw down with him because he has said some horrible things that the rest of us have had to unpack for people. And, there's lots of things that I would take issue with Augustine on. And so, I think that, but it would be a good practice for me and for my newly converted nonviolent C.S. Lewis to harness the spirit nonviolently in how we confront Augustine.
Nice. I love it. I love that you weave storytelling into it as well. I can tell that you're a good preacher, just based off
thank you.
how you can weave story like that. Yeah, because that's fun. That's the first. I think you're the first person who said C.S. Lewis to have a drink with. Yeah, but you're not. I think you're maybe the second person to say you'd fight Augustine. He comes up.
Some other people bothered by him, huh?
Yeah, Calvin comes up often. I got Christopher Columbus one time as somebody that they'd like to fight.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's always a fun one. I have another crowd pleaser question for you that I'll ask you next. But
okay, so I'm gonna go with a fun one that I have.
Sweet.
I've never asked this, but I do have like some questions that I normally ask. I haven't even got to those yet, so maybe I'll hit those next. But I was curious where you'd go with this one. If you had to sum up your theology in a meme,
ooh,
what would it be?
In a meme.
I'm going to pour more wine while you're thinking about this.
Yeah, amen.
Enjoying this conversation.
Me too. This is a lot of fun. I think I would need to find a meme that best represents like love. So like maybe, I don't know, is there some kind of meme of like a big cuddly creature like offering a hug or something like that?
I'm thinking of Baymax as you're describing this.
Ooh, Baymax would be actually awesome for this. Okay, so Baymax is the character in the meme, and it's basically the gist of it is that what I'd want to convey, and I'm stealing this language, this is quoting Trip Fuller, the truest thing about you is that you're known, seen, and loved by the divine. And I want Baymax to be that representation.
Yes.
Inviting everybody into that. And then you can do the cool fist bump and go, la 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 la. Yeah. That's where I want to go. Baymax
listeners,
is perfect.
we need this to
that.
exist.
Baymax.
We need this to exist. That's amazing.
Yeah. And Baymax is perfect. I haven't thought about Baymax in that way before. So now you got my brain turning. I wrote it down. It's a note.
Run with
Baymax.
it, man.
Yeah.
That's yours now. No one can take that from you.
All right. Well, so this is a fun question I love to ask because I always get different answers on this one, and sometimes really weird, unexpected answers. So it's a 2-parter, but if you could cut one book out of the Bible, so you're ditching a book out of the Bible, which book would you get rid of? And then also you can now canonize any written document. So ditch a book and canonize one. Yeah.
Man, that is. See, this is a question I would want to spend a lot of time on, because I feel like it's like a genie that I would waste my wish on, you know. And then later I'd be like, shoot, I said the wrong book. I should have done this book. Oh man, what book am I cutting out? My mind is going of like, what's the most misused book in the Bible? That's kind of where I'm feeling like. And my top 2 ones hitting my head are Romans and Genesis.
Cool. Yeah.
I actually like both the books. I just think they are used to create a lot of damage in a lot of Christianity today. You know what? I'm going to stay on the LGBTQ theme. We're going to take out Romans.
All right.
Because we're going to take out Romans 1 right out because I think it's misunderstood anyways. So you no longer have that. You don't get to use that. And then what book am I replacing with? Oh, man. Oh, that's such a good question. I'm going to go. I think I'm going to go Cross Vision by Greg Boyd.
Ooh, nice.
Have you read this?
I have.
So he actually had one. The academic one's called Crucifixion of the Warrior God, which I think is
Big
a way
two-parter.
cooler title. Yes,
Yeah.
two-parter. I read that originally, and that sucker, it's incredible. So it depends. Like, do we want the easier reader version in the Bible, or do we want the academic one? I'll let the listeners can decide that. But there's an academic one. There's an easier to read one that doesn't get into as many cool details, but you can make it all the way through without wanting to throw the book off a shelf. So I think I would do that, because that, I think, is probably the single greatest, like, one book that I recommend to people who are struggling with what I mentioned I struggled with in college, was like, all this junk in the Old Testament, what on earth do we do with it? And Greg was the first one that I have read. I don't think there's many that have attempted this, which is, rather than just defending these horrific passages in the Old Testament, I'm actually going to show you how they help you understand Jesus better. And I remember when he was he was writing this book, he told me that premise. I was like, I don't know, Greg. I don't know if you can do that. Like, that seems like a lot. And then I read it and I'm like, oh, okay, you did it. I think so. And I know not everyone was convinced by that book, but maybe I'm biased, but I felt like that was amazing. And that book I give to people who are wrestling with that of like, gosh, God looks awful. I mean, God's a dick in the Old Testament. And then it's like, and then now he's Jesus. It's like, what are we supposed to do with this? I mean, literally, I tell people, listeners of my show will have heard this already, but I think the worst chapter in all of the Bible is Numbers 31. I've said, like, that is the most horrific, barbaric, like, just awful depiction of God gets his own virgins as spoils of war that are literally designated. I just think, like, there's so much just so gross about that. And so, like, when you read that, you know, and I've had people in my church before that's like, yeah, that's what God is like. I'm like, no, he's not. Like, not at all. So Cross Vision's the book that helps, I think, people work through that.
Sweet.
That's a tricky. I'm gonna rethink that question though.
Yeah, all right.
I'll be laying in bed tonight and I'm like, no, I should have said this.
Yeah, right on.
I think you're gonna haunt me with that.
It's a fun one. I mean, Cross Vision's great, and that and Crucifixion of the Warrior God. Or I guess technically all three of those books made it through my slimming down of my shelves. So I've maintained them and still enjoy them. And actually, that's one of the books that I was happy to read with Pastor Mark, the last pastor that I worked with. He was kind of down with it. So that was kind of cool. Yeah, that's some solid answers. I've gotten so many weird things, dude. Like my one friend, Sari, wanted to canonize the Taco Bell menu because she was trying to think of like the thing that could least cause harm to people. And she was like, if you mess up the Taco Bell menu, that's on you. Like,
I do love Taco Bell.
Yeah. Taco Bell doesn't love me. We'll leave it at that.
Okay, say no more. All right, what is something you used to believe that it turned out later you were wrong about?
Ooh, man. I mean, I could, continue on the LGBTQ theme, but I feel like we've talked about that a lot. But like, I literally I gave my brother a book written by a gay Christian who claimed to not be gay anymore and living celibately. And like, that's one of the biggest regrets I have in my life. Luckily, he did not hold that against me and was just like, whatever, this is just Josh being Josh. And I was in college when that happened. So that's a big one. I mean, things that I taught. I think for me, honestly, even though I wrestled with it a lot, I'm not super comfortable with how I used to talk about atonement. Even though obviously there was a point in my life when penal substitutionary atonement was my perspective and I would speak out of that place. And then I shifted, had some different perspectives, but I think in general, I've just been wrong about that. And that oftentimes atonement theology has ramifications that we don't think about. And I'm not comfortable with how some of the ways I've talked about atonement portrays God, how it portrays the relationship between Father and Son, how it portrays relationship between us and God, these kind of things. Today, when asked about atonement, I, before could have spouted off something snappy, and I don't really know. This happened to me recently. I was at an event on a panel and someone asked, like, I want to know what the panel's thoughts on atonement is. And I sent it to the other side of the panel first. But then when I was forced to answer, basically what I said was like, I don't really know what I think about atonement anymore. But what I do know is that in the person of Jesus, we find a God who, 1, chose not to be God without us, 2, demonstrated that God would rather die for a cause than to ever kill for one, and 3, chooses solidarity with all of those who die cross-dead in history. And that's about all I could muster. That sounds pretty cool to me, but there's some people that would want more out of that, right? And so I think, yeah, that's one that I think I'm not comfortable with how I used to talk about, and it probably has had some negative impacts and consequences on people that I wish I could take that back. Yeah. Did that answer your question? My ADHD brain kind of went off with that one.
No, it's good. Yeah, you went more on like things that you've taught, which that opens up a whole nother can. I was talking more like what did you used to believe that you changed? But when you added an element, which is interesting, of things that you taught, man, just so many sermons that I look back on, I'm just like, ugh, I cannot believe I said that. You know what I mean? Or like, but I always have to remind myself, like, that's the sign of growth. Like, if you don't ever have that moment, if you never look back on something that you go, I cannot believe I did that, then you're not growing. Like, you're the same person, that you were, and we're not the same people we were, which is cool. But it also means you have these kind of regret stories of like, I cannot believe I believed that or taught that or gave that book out or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, I remember having an experience one time where I was kind of looking over my bookshelves, which I don't know how many you can see, but there are many in this room, overflowing. And I was like, man, I can't believe I read that book, or like this was helpful or whatever. But I kind of had this moment where I was like, hold on, Josh, like that's not fair. Like each of these books was super helpful at a particular point in time for you and a part of like your own kind of spiritual growth and journey. And so there was kind of like an invitation in that moment that I felt like, okay, how can I have grace for past versions of Josh who was just doing the best that he could with what he knew at the time? And so like, yeah, that's how I try to think about, you know, some of the things that I might have said or taught in the past, or systems that I may have, continued to perpetuate, is that trying to have grace for myself. But yeah, if it's just, belief, like hell, all sorts of crazy stuff about demons, the rapture, to name a few, were big ones for me that I don't even have categories for anymore. Yeah. Let's see. For you, all right, I have two questions that are very closely related. All right, I'll give you this one first. Why are you still a Christian?
Because I can't quit Jesus. And Jesus continues to be the most beautiful expression of all that is true, all that is right, all that is beauty itself that I've ever seen. And I've never seen anything that can rival Jesus. And I've looked, and I continue to look. And it's hard for me. And, you had kind of expressed earlier, there's days when you don't think of yourself like as a Christian. I understand that, because there's days where I look at Christianity or things done in the name of God or labeled in the name of God, and it just so grieves me that I'm like, I want nothing to do with this. Like I just watched this week, there was that clip of the White House press secretary praying with her team before she, goes out there and then like objectively lies to everybody, and they can like prove that what she's saying is not true. And I'm like, you just literally like summon the name of Jesus over that. And there's just days that I'm like, I can't get far enough away from whatever that is. And, call it whatever you want to call it. I would say at a minimum, it's taking the Lord's name in vain, but just all of that. And yet I do not find that with Jesus. And when I read the Gospels, I'm just so enamored with this person that just doesn't fit any mold, doesn't play to power, doesn't play to the hype, and just seems so intriguing to me. And I'm just drawn in because I fully believe that me following Jesus has brought out the best version of me and has made me a way fuller version of who I am. And I would not be that without Jesus. And I think that's the hope of the world. And I got asked this last week, this question. I was talking to someone about how I didn't believe in the traditional view of hell. And they said, well, what's the point of sharing Jesus with people? And I said, the point is that Jesus is the source of life and beauty and truth. And I wouldn't want anyone to go another day without experiencing that. And that's who I think Jesus is. Like, I wouldn't want anyone to miss out on that. And not because you're scared of what God's going to do if you get it wrong, but because you can go everywhere else and then you can find everything you've ever been looking for in this person of Jesus. And so that is why I still am a Christian. Although I will admit this to you, and I've said this before on my podcast, but I find this, I don't know if this is true for you, when I meet someone and my first thing in the conversation is they'll say like, I'll find out that they're a Christian. I immediately assume I'm not going to like you and we're not going to agree. And I've realized like I'm a functional atheist at this point. Like not in my belief, because I still believe in Jesus, but in how I interact. Like I don't functionally fit into, at least in the United States, this evangelical mainstream version of Christian. I just don't fit into it. So when I meet people there, and like my wife and I, she took me out for like my last birthday. We went to a resort for the night and we're swimming in the pool, and we meet this couple next to us, and they mention that they go to some church or whatever. And then immediately I'm like, the conversation's going to go bad. And it did. It did go bad. Because they
Dang
started talking
it.
about how the Bible preaches against gay people. And I just like, yeah, we're not those kind of Christians, you know? And then it was like, what do you mean those kind of Christians? So like, there's so much about Christianity, but that goes back to my original answer of I'm trying to help people deconstruct the junk, reconstruct something new that looks like Jesus. And the line that I often use is good theology is theology that looks like Jesus. So we're
nice.
working through hell or sexuality or anything you're working through, whatever the issue is, good theology is theology that looks like Jesus. So how do you get a Jesus-looking answer to whatever it is you're working through? And that's why I'm still here, man.
Yeah, snaps, no notes, dude. I love asking people that question because you get a variety of answers, right? And but Jesus seems to be the thing that keeps people around, and I mean that's very true for me as well. So, yeah, it's a fun one.
All right, what is something blowing your mind right now?
Ooh. Yeah, so I went to a talk the other night. There's an independent bookstore not too far from me here in Baltimore called Red Emma's. Shout out to Red Emma's. They're wonderful. And they host conversations there on a regular, but this one happened to be between a philosopher / theologian that I already had lined up to come on the podcast. Turns out they live in Baltimore. Super cool. And another philosopher who is from Sweden. And they were having a conversation on the climate crisis and how economics play into that. And so the critique that the individual who I want to say his name, but I feel bad because I'm not going to be able to say it correctly because I heard him say it and it has like a little circle over the A in his name because it's like
we're not equipped to pronounce
yeah,
that.
right. To me, it says Stale Holgerson, but like that's not right. I butchered it. But the argument that he was making is actually that capitalism breeds crises, and crises necessarily reproduces capitalism. And he said that, you know, he then laid out like historically all of these different major economic crises in U.S. history and asked the question like, okay, who benefited from these things? And it was always the ruling class, the super wealthy, and who was impacted the most by these things. And it's always those on the margins because crises always hit from underneath. And so him framing things that way kind of like you said, blew my mind and set off some like aha type moments for me to the point where I bought his freaking book. I'm going to interview him in a couple weeks on the podcast, but it just feels like it brought some clarity, you know, to some things that may or may not be going on in the US today and was super helpful. So it's not like a theology or philosophy. Well, it's philosophy, but it's not like related to faith stuff, but his critique was interesting. And I think in general, hearing critiques of like my country that I grew up in from those who are outside of it and didn't grow up here are interesting because they kind of have a different perspective on it, right? So that kind of blew my mind, and I've still been thinking about that a lot.
Love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the fun thing about having a podcast is you can like see someone or read something, and then you're like, I'm going to get you on the show and we're going to unpack this. And I love reading books when I know that the author is going to be on the show, because then I read it differently where I'm like, oh, circle this. We're going to talk about this sentence. You know what I mean? And like, what a cool honor that is to be able to say like, hey, I'm going to engage in the person who wrote this sentence down and unpack it. And I think that's hopefully what listeners pick up as well. Like, oh, these are cool connections, you know, of things that you and I are truly just fascinated by.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's like the secret, you know, I have all these like nice sounding reasons why I love podcasting about like helping people. And, you know, there's a line that I was told once about like, if you go deep enough into your own story, that other people will find themselves there as well. Like all of that's true. These are why I do the podcast, but a secret part of that is I get to talk to the people that I want to talk to.
Oh yeah, totally.
There's like a slight selfishness in there, but he was funny because he was like, Josh, like, you know, like I'm no expert on faith. Is that okay? And I was like, yeah, dude, like And I sent him a quippy email back. That was fun, but I'm excited to talk to him about that. So anyway, I guess I want to ask you a question about wine, because you do, with at least the Cabernet and Pré bit, you introduced wine into theology. And so I'm wondering for you, what's the connection? Like, how do you see sharing a glass of wine with somebody? Like, how does that, I don't know, impact conversation? Does that make theology better? Does it make it worse? How do you see that relationship between having a good glass of wine and talking about conversations like this?
I think it makes authenticity easier. And like I said, I just have noticed that people, you get a glass of wine in them, and there's a Latin expression, in vino veritas. I literally have this tattooed on my inner arm.
Nice.
It says in vino veritas in a wine glass there. And it means in wine there is truth. And I love that phrase. And to me, what that means is when you have a glass of wine with someone, it's more likely that truth is going to come out. And it's kind of this like liquid truth serum. And I just have seen it lower people's inhibitions, make people more comfortable. There's a wine theologian named Gisela Kreglinger, and I had her on an episode, and she actually coined a phrase. I'm trying to think of how she words it. I think she calls it phrased it like the spirituality of holy tipsiness. And she actually talks about that getting a little bit intoxicated is a spiritual space. And you hear this and you're like, wait, that just sounds like you just want to drink. It's like, well, maybe there's something there. And I would say to anyone who has had conversations over a beer, over a glass of wine, you've probably noticed like those conversations tend to be a little bit more raw, a little bit more honest. And so I really enjoy that there is this thing that brings people together. And, for me, I used the church space to do that for decades, and then I was like, well, what if we created spaces outside of that? And so podcasting allows obviously those conversations where you can explore it. But, if you want to explore ideas that are beyond what the typical evangelical church is currently at, where are you going to explore those? I mean, you have to find some other avenue, which again, I think why podcasting is awesome right now. But it's also where, we create events and we create trips. And I mentioned this wine and whiskey trip. We had 9 guys who didn't know each other at the start, right? Who all flew in and end up sharing like incredible, intimate details about their journey with God and faith and life. And a lot of it was designed around these tasting experiences. And so to me, it's like, I love wine by itself. I think there's such beauty in it. And I mean, this is literally, to me, it's a mix of the beauty of creation where we're taking something literally we were given, but then it's also us physically partnering with God to create something, which you had mentioned that earlier of like, what does it theologically mean to partner with God? To me, every time you drink a glass of wine, it's that reminder of this was grown, and you see the vines and you see the grapes, and then they were made into something by a winemaker, and then it was aged, and this beauty comes out, and now you can taste all these things that aren't in the wine. People ask me that a lot, like, hey, you said you got raspberry and cranberry, like, did they mix those fruits into it? It's like, no, those aren't in there. They just emerge. And so like it becomes more than the sum of its parts. And I think that's what intrigues me about wine, where you're tasting all these things that are not in there, but you can experience it. And I think it's a metaphor, a very tangible metaphor for God. And then I just love that Jesus seemed very comfortable with wine. Obviously John 2, the first miracle, John 15, he uses literally like the entire vine as an analogy to explain what it looks like to connect with God. Like, it's incredible stuff. And I've taught that, that story, John 15, in a vineyard. And I promise you it takes on a different tone when you read those verses and then you look over and you see a vine and you know what I mean? And you're imagining someone cutting it and trimming it and shaping it. And you're like, oh, that's what it looks like. And then you're like, oh, this is how Jesus explained intimacy with God. Like, it's just so fascinating to me. So as you can see, like I geek out about that, but like, I just think there's so much there. It's such beauty and I'm just drawn to it. And I just think it's incredible.
Yeah, well, I'm here for it, dude. I feel like you need to come to Theology Beer Camp.
I do need to.
Don't let beer scare you away. There's wine there as well.
I do drink beer. I drink whiskey. I'm open.
But
I just don't. My problem is like I'm not an IPA guy.
Yeah.
And so like when I was in Oregon, I'd be like, "Hey, do you guys have a wheat beer?" And you know, I'd like to whisper it. They're like, "Oh, this guy."
Yeah.
You know, it's like I just can't. I can't hang with beer drinkers.
Yeah, no worries. We're, as Tripp would say, we're open and affirming for all beverage connoisseurs.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, at Theology Beer Camp. But I love what you just said about wine. It reminds me too of like, you know, to tap into some of the, you know, more Buddhist side of myself. When you're talking about like wine being more than the sum of its parts, all these kind of things. Like Thich Nhat Hanh would talk about, who is a Buddhist monk who passed away a couple years ago, would talk about doing things mindfully, right? So like eating or drinking mindfully. And he would invite you to like, okay, in this case, look into our glass of wine and see and he was like, basically, if you're open to the experience and you look long enough, of course, wine. And then maybe you're like, okay, so there's grapes here. Okay, but then also I can see the farmers who grew the grapes or the winemaker who crafted it, or, you know, the vineyard workers who tended the vine as it was growing. But also I can see the soil that it grew out of, the sunshine that shined on the vine. I can, you know, the rain that nourished it. And ultimately you can come and kind of figure out that like the universe is present in this glass of wine if you have eyes to see. And so that kind of like slowing down to try to be mindful and just see how much, you know, I love how you talk about it bringing people together, like how much it can connect us over, you know, a beverage like this. Very similar reasons to why I love beer and brewing, and to see how that, you know, when I left church world, the thing that I missed the most was my community. And for me, Full Tilt Brewing became that community of belonging. You know, we sang together, we obviously drank together, we ate together. We were happy when our friends were happy. We mourned with those who needed to mourn. And it is just a really beautiful thing. So I don't know, I'm here for it, dude. This is a solid answer. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, if you'll indulge me as a beer guy, I'd be curious your answer. You've had wine. You said your wife likes wine more than you do. Mm-hmm. If I asked you, what is like the best glass of wine you've ever had in your life? Ooh. Is there a story that comes to your mind? Is there a bottle? Was there a situation? Have you ever had that moment where you're like, wow, this one is just all of it's coming together in the right way?
That's a really good question. I don't know, because for me, often when I think of wine, I think of being with other people, because the majority of my wine drinking experiences are around going to a winery and meeting, you know, celebrating a friend's birthday or something. And so it's never really like this particular wine, but like I've tons of really positive experiences of sharing wine with people, you know, that come to mind. But like, I don't know. I don't think I'm wine cool enough to answer like this particular wine. Although I don't know. I do love a good Cab Sauv. I tend to stay away from like the sweeter stuff. I know I can tell you the first glass of wine I had was Moscato. And at the time that was great. But today I'm like, not so much. It's fine. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I know that's not a good answer. I don't really have one for you, but I mostly think of people when I think about wine, which is interesting. I haven't thought about this before.
No, that's great.
Yeah, but
so that's a question I ask people on the podcast, and it's interesting because some people, the thing they remember is a specific wine. Some people remember the place they're in. So like it was I was in Italy, I was in France, I was in whatever, and then some people will say the people who were there with. You know, we were doing this, and so it's always interesting to me. It's not like one answer every time of like, well, that was the most expensive wine I've ever had. You know, it's like not that. Sometimes people are like, we were drinking out of little paper cups. You know, like it's always been these different answers. But that's what's so fascinating to me about wine is it is all these different variables that can make it an amazing experience.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that it is interesting because at first what my brain went to where I was like, okay, how would a wine person answer this? And I was like, what's the most expensive bottle of wine I've ever had?
Right.
And the answer is the most expensive bottle of wine that was ever put in front of me, I couldn't drink because at the church that I worked at the time, I wasn't supposed to. And they didn't tell me that until after I was hired and moved across the freaking country.
Oh, no.
And my uncle and aunt took Noelle and I, my wife, out to dinner and bought like this like $350 bottle of wine. And I was like, I'm sorry. I can't. I'm going to get fired.
Oh, geez. That's brutal.
So Noelle got to have it and I didn't. I was like, dang it.
See, so that was the best wine you've ever had. You just didn't have it.
I just didn't have it. Right. Yeah. That's that was my, to tie in a theology joke, that was my radical wine experience. It was present, but it was non-existent. And
oh man,
I didn't have the ability to actualize the potential of that wine. It's very sad.
I feel for you on that one.
All right. Well, I guess I have two more, but we're cranking out on time here.
We are. This is a hefty episode here.
It is. And so we should probably shut it down. This is a kind of a difficult question, but I'll leave you with this one. What do you think is the most important theological question that the church should be asking itself today?
Does it look like Jesus?
Ooh, nice.
I could make it more complicated, but I would, at the essence, this idea we're all promoting. Does it look like Jesus? And I'm amazed how often that's not asked. Like, well, no, that's what we've always believed. That's what the creeds teach. Does it look like Jesus? It's not more complicated. And so many of the way I've changed my ideas over the years have just come from the simplicity of going back to Jesus and trying to be honest with myself. Like nonviolence, we've talked about it a little bit. I grew up with a very different view, and I owned 3 different guns, and I had my concealed carry permit at one point, and I would carry concealed with me, and I would have been fully self-justified to take someone's life, to kill a bad guy to save the good guys, and that's how you do that. And Greg, again, who mentored me over the years, I remember had a conversation with me one time where he just said, "Heck, what did Jesus teach about our enemies?" And he has this way of leading me without being condescending, I'm like, well, we're supposed to love them. And he's like, yeah, how do you think we love an enemy? I'm like, oh, all right. He's like, no, specifically, how do you love someone who's literally opposing you? So we started talking about it, right? And he's like, what if someone's trying to break into your home? How do you love them? I mean, just weird questions, and I just keep talking. And I had this one answer where I had so pontificated on how you could justify I'll never forget. He's like, do you think you're making it more complicated than what Jesus actually said? And I'll just never forget that question. And I was like, now that you say that, yes. And just had to wrestle with this doesn't actually look like Jesus and the example I see. And I think if the church asked that question on everything, on the way they spend budget, on the way they invest money. And again, I say this as a guy, I'm on the edge of the inside. I have been the guy signing the checks for years, right? And even in that role, I would oversee $1 million budgets of multi-millions of production stuff. So moving lights and screens and projectors and you're seeing the bills to buy these things. And I just remember going this is some woman's tithe, some single mom bringing all that she can. And it was just this tension always. And I think that's a tension you should always have in the church. Does this look like Jesus? And the minute you stop asking that and you go, yes, it does, we're good, is probably when you're opening the door for a whole bunch of other stuff. And so I think theologically, experientially, in every aspect of it, does it look like Jesus? I think would be a game-changing question.
Yeah, solid, dude. I am here for it. If I were to somehow find my way back into church ministry, which I'm fairly confident would lead to a divorce, which I'm not trying to do. That's right. That's the question that I hope I would ask, because I think that still guides so much of what I do today, even though I'm doing it from, outside the doors of the church, so to speak, but still very much within the tradition. So,
okay, I've got, I think, a good question to land this on.
All right, to wrap it up, let's do it.
So we've been all over the place talking about all sorts of things, but dear listeners and viewers, we're going to give you some hope here. So here's my question to you. With everything you've seen, everything you've experienced, the good, the bad, the junk, all of it, what gives you hope today?
Yeah, that's a good question. What gives me hope today? I don't know, this is probably going to sound like a cliche answer, but I think what gives me hope today is the people in my life that have continued to stick around and support me and be my friend and care about me, regardless of what my job title looked like, regardless of what my Christology looked like, regardless of what my, insert theological doctrine here looks like. Those people give me hope. And even like the people in my life that don't give two shits about theology or philosophy or that I'm a Christian or whatever, but continue to show up, continue to text me and check in on me and all these kind of things. So I genuinely think people give me hope, the way that people show up for one another, the way that communities form. And it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be, like a mega church or something. Yeah, like there's just so many people that I can think of that I'm grateful for. Like the two owners of Full Tilt. They brought in this hurt, beat up kid off the street and let me try to brew beer for their business. And two of them are still like my closest friends today. They're awesome. Or there's a bartender at a bookstore that I like to go to that has been a really awesome friend and, that I can talk to and share my stuff with in a space that's like not judgmental, but also like when it is judgmental, it's like the right kind of judgmental. You know what I mean? Like call you on your BS kind of stuff. So yeah, I haven't lost hope in humanity. Even though I think the temptation is to do so, it seems kind of paradoxical to me that there are a lot of people who suck. But it's not everybody. And the people in my life that continue to come around are what give me hope. And the way that I see people love each other and show up for each other and stand up for people that they don't have to stand up for. There's still goodness out there. And that's what I hope that I can, be a part of as well and try to be a part of. I don't know how good I am at it, but yeah, I think that's what gives me hope. People still carrying on and trying to give in to the things that are good and beautiful and true, even when everything around you is screaming, none of this matters. This is all stupid. Only care about yourself. The people who don't do that and continue to demonstrate love, they give me hope. And so I want to be a part of whatever that is. And sometimes that's called Christianity.
Well said, sir. Well said.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know.
I feel like we're kindred spirits.
I think so. I mean, like the, black t-shirt, hat, tattoos. I mean, your sleeve is very complete and mine is not. So I'm not going to lie. I'm kind of jealous, but
you got a little space there
I'm working on it. Yeah. It'll get there.
Stuff.
But yeah, this was super fun. I'd love to, hang out and talk again sometime, or, hopefully maybe our paths will cross in person. I could think of some fun beer, wine things I feel like we could come up with. So
yeah,
possibilities are endless.
Well, and I think what's cool is we probably are reaching very similar people with both of our crowds. And so hopefully you guys are swapping over, and checking out the other one. Because I think if you like one of our contents, you will probably like the other person as well.
Very much agreed.
Yeah, it's like It's like Christmas. You find all sorts of new episodes to go listen to or watch or enjoy.
Yeah. So I'm here for it. I'm excited about this. I'll obviously, tag your show and all your stuff when I throw this out on social media and let people know to come check out your work. So
well, Josh, thanks. And thanks to all of you guys for joining in on Podcast Inception Day.
Woo!
We'll see y'all next time.
Peace and love, guys.